Okay, welcome everyone. We're so glad to have you here. There may still be a few people joining, which is wonderful. My name is Annie Simpson. I'm the Associate Director of Troost ILead. And for anyone who doesn't know very much about Troost ILead, we are a leadership education institute for engineers, and we focus on the personal and professional development of engineers. And our vision is engineers leading change to build a better world. So thank you for being here, and thank you for coming to this career talk. A few suggestions as far as how you set up your view. We have a slide here that will give you some helpful instructions if you're not as familiar with Zoom. So we suggest, Natalia, are you able to forward to the next slide? Thank you. So for setting up your view, if you go to the very top, you can click on view options and then side by side, and you'll be able to see people in kind of a gallery view on one side and the slides on the other. So we recommend that for everyone. All right, next slide, please. So a few event norms. We want to ask to please leave your microphones off just to kind of keep our volume working so we can hear panelists as they're speaking. We also want to let everybody know that this session will be recorded. So if you would like to keep your camera off during these panel portions, please feel free to do that. And finally, we will have an opportunity for a formal Q&A period at the end of today's session. But as we move through the conversation, if you have questions that you really want to ask the panelists, we really encourage you to put those in the chat. They may respond to you by chat, but you're welcome to put them there, and hopefully some of those answers will come to you before we get to the formal Q&A period. Okay. So we'd like to begin our session today with a land acknowledgement. Natalia, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So before I read this acknowledgement, I just want to acknowledge the difficult time that we are moving through as a collective right now, and sort of a twin pandemic that we are experiencing in the world. There's the COVID-19 pandemic. There's also a really a collective reckoning with systemic racism that exists in North America and beyond. And the land acknowledgement is read as a way of further educating ourselves on the history of Indigenous people in Canada and the many, many, many thousands of years that they were on this land before settlers arrived on the land. So we want to read this acknowledgement and encourage you to reflect on Indigenous peoples in this land and on your own place in this land. Even if you're not in Toronto, there's a link here at the bottom that you can click on, and we'll put it in the chat as well. And you can actually learn about the Indigenous history of wherever it is that you are calling in from. Okay. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississauga of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. There's a link as well to this land acknowledgement and to Indigenous history and to academia and research, which we will be diving into today. And we wanted to actually share a book for those of you interested in research. Sometimes, you know, there's questions of whose knowledge counts and what knowledge counts and ways of knowing. And we want to recommend a book called Decolonizing Methodologies, Research and Indigenous Peoples by Linda Smith. So those of you wanting to learn more about research methodologies from an Indigenous perspective, we suggest that you check that out. Okay. So our agenda for today, for this career talk, there we go. We are going to have a couple opportunities for some panel conversation, and there will be one breakout discussion in the middle, just to give you a chance to integrate what you've heard and connect with some of your peers. And then we'll have some Q&A at the end. When we were thinking about this session and wondering about who may come to this session, we were conscious that some of you on this particular session might be thinking about grad school. Is grad school kind of the right path for me? Some of you might be really clear that you want to be a professor someday, or you're interested in education. Some of you are really interested in invention and innovating in with new technologies. And some of you really want to solve problems through discovery and research around all kinds of interesting areas. So we want to acknowledge that people are coming into this from different places, and that some of you also may be feeling some uncertainty given the time we're in about your career, about, maybe that career that I thought I'd go into isn't going to be available right now. And maybe grad school would actually be a good thing to do during this time. So we recognize that everybody's sitting with questions, and we welcome those. So I did want to say that this particular Career Talk series is not so much about how do I get prepared for the interview and write the resume and all those kinds of things. We're going to suggest some career resources at the end. Really what we're here for today is to hear from 4 people in this field, and hear about their experience, their stories, their advice, their perspective. So that's really what we're here to do today. Okay, so with that, I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists. And panelists, after I introduce you, I'd love you to just unmute yourself if you are muted, and just say hello and let us know where you are calling in from today. Okay, so I'm going to start with Minha. Minha Ha is the instructor of TEP 447, the art of ethical and equitable decision making, and a PhD candidate at the Lassonde School of Engineering. She has degrees in molecular biology and education, and has spent a number of years both teaching and researching about sustainability, ethics and equity, and educational leadership. Minha's research highlights how systems perspectives and transdisciplinary knowledge impact the design practice of engineers. So we are delighted to have you with us, Minha. Where are you calling in from today?
Thank you, Annie. Hi, everyone. I'm calling in from Mississauga, Ontario.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So next we have Dr. Emma Master. Dr. Emma Master is a professor in the Department of Chemical Engineering and Applied Chemistry. She's also the Associate Chair of Research, and she's also the Associate Director of BioZone, a Center of Applied Bioscience and Bioengineering. Dr. Master's work focuses on the use of renewable materials that will support our transition to a sustainable bio-based economy. And Emma is a highly accomplished professor with numerous prestigious awards, but one little highlight, in the last 10 years, Emma has supervised probably more than 64 students. That includes postdocs, PhDs, and master's students. Welcome, Emma. Where are you calling from this morning?
Thank you, Annie. Thanks for the introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm calling in from Toronto.
Wonderful. Thank you. Our next panelist is Herman Ruvalcaba. I hope I'm correct. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Herman. Herman is a biomedical engineer with 3 years of experience in medical device development and fast-paced medical companies. He completed an MEng in biomedical engineering at the University of Toronto and has worked in multiple projects related to product development, medical regulatory compliance programming, image processing, medical 3D printing, VR, and ML. And he's currently working at Baylis Medical as a research and development engineer. Welcome, Herman. Where are you this morning?
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here, and I'm calling from Mississauga.
Okay, we are a very GTA-oriented crowd. Thank you. And lastly, Dimpho Radebe is an Indy 1T4 plus PEY. She completed a master's in science and management, specializing in operations management from the University of Bath, and has 5 years of work experience in the private and public sectors. She most recently worked as a senior analyst in cancer screening implementation at Cancer Care Ontario, and has returned to the University of Toronto to pursue a PhD in engineering education that will focus on engineers who transition to the public sector. So thank you all so much. And I want to dive into our questions now. And the first question is for Emma and then for Dimpho. And the question is, when you were an undergraduate student, did you know that you might end up in a research-oriented career? And how did you discover that this was the path for you? So Emma, if we could start with you, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks. I was reflecting on this and remembered very well that when I was an undergraduate student, the genomics era, so the impacts of genomics and gene sequencing was just starting to emerge. And I knew early on that I wanted to be part of the scientific community that could decipher this blueprint of living systems and learn how to determine what it all encodes. And it was that curiosity that then opened opportunities for me in summer research positions within labs at the university that I was where I was pursuing my undergraduate studies. And through those summer research experiences, I saw firsthand the commitment and focus and perseverance of real life scientists, and that really drew me in.
Amazing. I really hear the kind of curiosity and wonder that was there for you from an early time. Okay. And Dimpho, how about you?
Yeah, so very similar, I think, to Emma. I didn't know that I wanted to pursue research, but I was curious and interested in it. So when I was in undergrad, actually at the time, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to be in engineering. But there were some areas of engineering as I started kind of moving forward in my years that I realized I was a bit more interested in. So I sought out a meeting with Professor Herman to understand what research in operations research would be like. I kind of explored that because I'd enjoyed those courses, and I thought that it was interesting, but I realized that it didn't feel like a right fit. So it really was after my PY experience that I realized that there was a particular area that I was interested in, which was understanding how leadership skills that undergrad students gained through extracurricular activities might have had a role in how they experienced PY. And because of my connection with ILead, I knew that there was an opportunity to do that type of research. So I reached out to Professor Greg Evans and did a thesis in my 4th year with him. At that time, though, I still wasn't entirely sure, but I started to realize that I was interested in research.
Okay, wonderful. Well, what I'm hearing there is that you kind of followed the breadcrumbs. There were a number of times where you reached out specifically to people who you knew had an interest in something that was intriguing to you. You took that initiative and you have followed that path. So thank you for that. Herman, I would like to ask you a question, and I'm going to come back to Dimpho. And that is, we're curious, when you think about the work that you do and you really drill down to what motivates your work, what's the change or the improvement that you're really hoping your work will have? What's underlying it for you? What's that deep motivation about how you want to affect change through your work?
For me, it has always been like really straightforward. I always wanted to create a positive impact in society. So because I always wanted to do that, I always try to work with companies or projects that the end goal is to help someone or to save someone's lives or improve someone's quality of life. So the fact that my work or the results of the work that our team does and at the end is going to help someone, I think that's the greatest fuel that I can have. And that's my greatest motivation, basically.
Amazing. So that human impact, saving lives, making lives better. That's amazing. How about for you, Dimpho? What's the impact you're hoping, that drives the work you want to do?
Mm-hmm. So very much the same, wanting to make an impact on the lives of others. And that is really what guided my desire to work in public sector and seeing that there is some strength in certain areas of public sector, let's say healthcare and education, that are really important, but where those systems aren't necessarily the strongest. And from entering into those areas, I can see that there's a lot of opportunity for engineers to make an impact. But I think simply because of history and the way that the engineering profession has sort of come to be, both engineers and the public sector don't necessarily see that fit. And so I'm hoping that through this research, I might be able to help to show how engineers can fit within the public sector to help broaden that impact.
Amazing. So I'm hearing in your response kind of influencing the system that then leads to the direct impact on people's lives. Okay, thank you. Minha, my next question is for you. And the question is for students who are here on the call, curious about, is a research direction a direction for me? What can students start doing today to build their research capacity?
Yeah, thank you. Usually in the beginning, ill-defined problem statements or jumping to conclusions, not knowing how to structure thinking and complex ideas is usually the hurdle for new students. So I would love to suggest actually picking up some beginning readings into philosophy of X. So if you're going to do education-related study, philosophy of education, philosophy of engineering, philosophy of design, you'll be surprised at how tremendously helpful they are for clarifying what you mean. So I would so read into that and then start with the definitions of your interested concepts.
Amazing. Okay, I'm hearing the transdisciplinary wisdom that you bring, Minha, into your own teaching and research, and just how empowering and important that might be for young researchers. Thank you. Okay, so my next question, I'm going to start with Herman and then go to Minha. And the question is, what kinds of factors would you suggest that new graduates pay attention to when they're deciding if an environment is the right environment for them? So Herman, from your perspective, what would you suggest they pay attention to?
I think this question or answer does not apply only to like new grads. I think everyone can well, see for these factors, but I would suggest for them to look for different things. First of all, work culture is one of the main things that people underestimate until they are in a position, in a place or company that their core values doesn't align with your personal values. And if that happens, you're not going to have a great time. You may have some conflicts, but something else that you have to consider is the mission and the vision of that place. Does those two things motivate you and excite you and want you to invest your time into the problems that you're trying to solve or the things that you're working on in that place? And let's say if everything works out, if the work culture is amazing, you are highly motivated by the mission and the vision, but if you're working in a toxic environment or you don't have that clique or some of your teammates are kind of toxic either, that can ruin the whole experience, and that would be a major red flag for you to identify that maybe that's not the right place, because at the end, you're going to spending a lot of time at work and you have to make sure that you'll be able to give your best and also enjoy the process.
Okay, great. Yes. So the culture, so important, and the mission and vision. Minha, I'm wondering what you would add to that.
I couldn't agree more. The peer support and mentorship and the institutional process are so key. Maybe to ask around as you do the investigation of testing out potential places that you might consider going, you can ask questions like, do grad students have clarity about institutional procedures, whether it's funding, conflict resolution, or training? What kind of professional development opportunities do they provide or participate in? How, and knowing your needs and looking for the right supervisor match, because each supervisor will have a different balance of problem solving, action orientedness. You need that support so they could clear the path for you to thought leadership, and you need that support too. So how involved are the supervisors in writing with you or editorial kind of work? Yeah, what kinds of support? I can go into more details later on.
Okay. Thank you, Minha. It's great, really fleshing that out. So one more question, and then we're going to move to a quick breakout. And this question is for Dimpho and then for Herman. Many graduate students are struggling between deciding whether to go to grad school or to work in industry first. And what did your experience look like, and what informed your decision? So Dimpho, if we could start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I did do PY, and I think for me that was a good opportunity to. I spent 16 months in one workplace, but it was a good opportunity for me to get a sense of what working in industry would be like. And I actually decided to pursue my PhD in large part because of the experience that I had during PY. I knew that I always wanted to work in public sector, but I struggled to see the pathway that I could kind of go on to get into the public sector. And so I actually ended up pursuing my graduate studies because I thought at the time that I wanted to kind of get a better understanding of private sector management principles and understand how they were or weren't being applied in the public sector and whether or not that brought value. So again, I think it's really about knowing what your interests are. And that comes, I think, through reflection, and a lot of ILead programs help with that as well. And then speaking to others, I spoke to my manager to understand whether or not that decision to pursue a program in another country might limit me, to know that I would still have options when I came back. And then choosing a program, which was a one-year program that had both courses and a research aspect to it, so I could kind of see which aspect of that I preferred the most. So all of those three things, I think, knowing my interests, speaking to others, and choosing an option that was somewhat flexible allowed me to kind of explore that area without closing me off in any particular way.
Great. And it sounds like you had some opportunity to sort of go in, go out, go in, go out when it comes to industry experience, academic experience, and they're kind of building on each other and helping to clarify, and ultimately brought you back to do a PhD. Thank you. And Herman, how about for you? When you think about students struggling to decide between graduate school, industry first, what was your experience like and what informed your decision?
I couldn't agree more with what Dimpho just said about the fact of consulting and talking with people that are in either field, especially because they've been on that field for a couple of years, right? So they could provide a really important insight that you might not be able to get as fast as you would want. But for my experience was that I was debating over that question for a long time. And at the end, what I did was volunteer with a professor to help him with his research for a term. And after that term, I approached some companies and told them that, hey, can I do a co-op? Can I volunteer for you as an engineer? Can I do that while I was doing my undergrad? So I could just experience the best of both worlds, or the worst of both worlds. It could be either way. But at the end, what I experienced and ended up was like, okay, I've seen and I've gathered enough experience to see what I like and what I'm not interested. And finally took a decision, because for me, or at least what I think, that you can get enough information from all the comments, from all your peers, but there's only until a certain point. And if you want to pass that point, you have to actually experience it and have your hands on that. So I would recommend to everyone who's debating on that to have a bit of time in both sides, so that you can actually experience it and see and clarify your thoughts, basically.
Fantastic advice. And I hear you too, that you actively sought out volunteer opportunities to give yourself that sense of, what is this like? And you really, again, that initiative taking and seeking out is very inspiring, and kind of can speed the learning up so that you then make choices that you feel quite confident about. That's wonderful. Thank you. So my next question is for Herman, and then for Dimpho. And this is a question I'm sure lots of people are going to be on the edge of their seat wanting to know the answer to. The question is, how did you find your current job? And also a sort of a different question that's wrapped into this question, but it's a very different question. How do you see research approached differently in industry than it is in academia? So Herman, if we could start with you, that would be great.
Yeah, that's a really complex question and really interesting. So yeah, well, let's start, I guess. I found out about my job during one of my graduate courses in medical device development. I actually talked with the professor. So keep good relationship with your professors. They can be really handy and mentor you. But to also address the second part of the question, I first must say that I believe that the research done in industry and academia share the same objective, which is solve problems ultimately. But from what I experienced and from what I've seen is that the main difference relies on what are the restrictions or things that each field considers. And also they focus, for example, in the industry, is heavily focused on product development, and academic research is mainly focused on how to contribute to overall human knowledge. Another of these differences are, for example, that industry has to factor or to consider that when they are developing a solution, they have to make sure that at the end it's going to be affordable, how to scale it, if the solution can comply with all the regulatory standards, that it has to make sure that it won't fail anytime, and that it has to be constrained with a timeline. While academia doesn't have these constraints, so they have more freedom to experiment and to try different things to solve a problem. But because they have this much freedom, it can be more difficult for them to try and to apply the solution and export it into overall like mass product available. So I think there's more to this answer, but mainly those are the two things that I see on different.
Thank you. That was a really great answer about the different contexts and different restrictions and different priorities in some ways. So thank you. That was great. Dimpho, is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of, you worked for Cancer Care Ontario, and you've sort of been out of academia, in academia. How do you see research being approached differently in the two spaces?
Yeah, so I actually quite agree with that idea of sort of the restrictions around research in industry versus in academia. Although I think for me, I even think of it in terms of a differentiation between private sector and public sector. Within private sector, I think it is very much geared towards product development. And so a lot of what Herman was talking about definitely comes into play there. And then you also, I think, have this sort of informal research in private sector where you might have like consulting companies that in a way are kind of doing their own kind of research, but what they're doing is drawing insights from the work that they do, and that ends up becoming a form of published sort of research. And then in public sector, research is very much, I found, kind of core to the work that is done there, especially now because there is a shift towards evidence-based decision-making, and very much so in areas like healthcare where patient safety is really priority. So what I've observed even within public sector is that sometimes you even have managers who have PhDs, and so they're not necessarily doing research, but because they come with a research kind of background, that's sort of how they approach the work and solving problems. And then I think there's this other third aspect, which is not as well known, but an area that I've also considered is NGOs or think tanks, and that really is research to drive policy, or I guess informing policy. So I think that the key difference that I've seen is in private and public, often the research can actually end up in an output. Academia, it might just be to contribute to the knowledge base, as like NGOs or think tanks might do as well.
Okay. Thank you. There's such a rich, you both have fleshed this out in a short time, all the avenues and kind of some of the differences in these different contexts and ultimate sort of goals of different kinds of organizations. So thank you. My next question is for Emma, and that is, when you hit roadblocks or setbacks in your research, you've had a lot of years now of doing, technical research and supervising a lot of people. And when you hit roadblocks and setbacks, what do you do to stay focused and motivated?
I hope it won't sound too goofy or geeky or for most of my adult life, I've read classical philosophy and Asian philosophy, and it has, for me, it has been very grounding. And one message that I've learned through those readings that I go back to regularly when I'm feeling like I need motivation, but one message that I've taken away is the importance of remaining level-headed when times are good, so that it's easier to weather when times are more difficult. And so I try to practice that, so that, when certainly things get difficult, but it doesn't feel like a rut. Having said that, I also get a lot of motivation from talking science, frankly, and life with members from my team. It's really invigorating to talk to young students and emerging scientists about their ideas and their results, and it's so that's always a, a source of motivation, absolutely. And the second approach, besides speaking with team members, is really quiet reflection and reminding myself that it's the patience and the perseverance that it often takes to be a research scientist that was what drew me in the first place. I think that's in a way what it takes to uncover some of nature's secrets, is just being patient and methodical and persistent. And it's really enjoyable when those nuts are then cracked finally.
Nature's secrets. That's so beautiful. And I want to just acknowledge that your reflection on reading classical philosophy and Asian philosophy, that we heard that Minha shared earlier, reading philosophy of education.
I like that too.
Yes. And I just want to reiterate that for people who are listening, that you've heard that twice now. You might want to check that out. So Emma, thank you for that. And remaining level-headed, what a challenge. Sorry, there's someone talk about remaining level-headed while your window is being hammered on. But no, in the world at large, what a critical skill. Okay, so our final question here is for Minha and for then Emma, and that is, what does leadership look like in an academic context? ILead is a leadership program. What does it look like? What does it look like to develop yourself as academic leaders? What kind of leadership is sort of valued within academia, and anything else that you want to say about what leadership looks like in an academic context? So Minha, we'll start with you and then we'll move to Emma.
Sure, I'm closer to the grad student life because I'm still at the end of it. I was pleasantly surprised during my master's and PhD how many opportunities there were for me to create and contribute value and actually bring in some thought leadership and then leave the place better than I found it. And there are many opportunities. I had to have a selection criteria in terms of, okay, I need to commit to opportunities that stretches me. So every year it's been different. Sometimes as a TA, I get to recommend changes to the course content, structure, and teaching, training. As a grad student, I got to participate in student associations, sitting on committees to represent grad students, and by representing, I was able to actually reach out to other departments to collect their feedback and discuss really important issues and bring them back to the committees. I got to organize conferences with my colleagues, and just so much. And you writing and contributing writings will be, and presentations with the public. It'll be an awesome way to also lead. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you've found so many ways to enact change, to create change by being on committees, suggesting changes, writing and publishing and presenting, and there's so many ways to encourage change. Sounds like you've definitely been highly active in all those spaces. Emma, how about you? What does leadership look like for you in an academic context?
I can think of 4 things. One is around taking initiative. So in an academic environment, it's very grassroots. So which is good and bad, but if you're someone who likes to take initiative and test out your own, your ideas, it's really conducive to that. So initiative is an important element of leadership in an academic environment. I think that's true generally, but especially in a grassroots type space. Thinking boldly, which can often mean being comfortable as an outsider. I think that's another characteristic. Being a good team player, which often means being a good follower, not only being a good leader, but knowing when to follow and to follow well and to support others. And then the 4th is somewhat related to that, but it's being a good listener, because I think leadership in an academic setting is often about articulating a new idea, a new and constructive idea, and you never know where those ideas come from. So being a good listener, listening carefully to your students, to your peers, to your collaborators is, from my perspective, an important piece.
Amazing. I hope everyone was taking notes as you were sharing those things, Emma. So much wisdom there. And I think related to this question, Minha had something she wanted to come back to, an example.
Yes, so 2018, my supervisor was chairing the Canadian Society of Mechanical Engineering Association. So we were hosting the conference. So I was given liberty to choose what part I wanted to lead. So I volunteered to organize 2 panels, new panels, realizing that they hadn't had panels before. They had never dealt with equity, diversity type of themes before. So actually reached out to my mentor and her network, recruiting female mechanical engineers, because we have many, to have one panel recognize the women's contributions to the field of mechanical engineering on different aspects, and the second panel on how we might tackle the EDI challenges in mechanical engineering specific context from the perspectives of researcher, senior engineers, newer engineers, and grad student and undergrad student. So that led to me forming really long-lasting relationships and finding one of my favorite mentors. So yeah, you never know.
Thank you for that. And certainly that initiative, like really stepping up and volunteering to do that and making those conversations happen that wouldn't otherwise be happening. So much of the leadership there and bringing those conversations forward. That's wonderful. So the last thing we're going to do before we open it up to Q&A, we're going to do something that we haven't done before. This is actually, I have to say, this is inspired from Brene Brown's podcast. I don't know if any of you have been listening to Brene Brown's podcast through the whole COVID pandemic, but I do really recommend them. She's interviewed a lot of really wonderful people on a whole bunch of issues that have been surfaced during the pandemic. She does something at the end called kind of rapid fire questions. So the panelists don't even know who I'm gonna call here for these questions, but the challenge to them is to answer the question in 1 sentence or possibly 1 word. That's kind of the challenge, okay? So my first question is for Emma and then for Herman. And the question is, from your perspective, what are the 2 most important qualities in a researcher?
Passion and perseverance.
Herman.
Drive and perseverance.
All right, amazing. Number 2, this is for Minha and then for Dimpho. The 2 most important qualities in a supervisor.
Commitment level to developing talent, and the balance between action orientation and thought leadership.
And Dimpho.
I was going to say, I think understanding your goals and interests, and then being supportive of those goals and interests.
Okay, amazing. Next question is for Herman and then Dimpho. Something you do to boost your confidence when you feel uncertain.
Remember that the worst thing that can happen is that I learn how to do it the proper way.
Nice.
I have 2 things here. I think affirmations, and I actually seek out workshops on the thing that I feel uncomfortable about to know that I'm not the only one that feels that way.
Nice. Okay. Next one is for Minha. Questions you wish more engineering researchers were asking.
What makes our work in institutions valuable, and to whom?
Okay, nice. Thank you. Two more. This next one's for Emma. Best piece of career advice you've ever received?
To accept challenges that you're passionate about, even if you don't feel prepared.
Awesome. And the last one, this is for Dimpho. What do you need in your life to be happy in your work?
For me, it's alignment with my values, to make sure that that is appearing in my work in some way.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay, thank you, panelists, for that rich discussion. And now we have some time for some open conversation. So I'm wondering, Milan, I know you've had your eye on the chat. Are there any questions that you want to raise? Maybe we'll start with you, and then we can ask anyone to unmute who would like to ask a question verbally.
Sure, there's a really great question from Martin in the chat that he frames as possibly a heated question, but one critique of research that he often hears from people in industry is that a lot of work might go into publishing a paper, but that often those bright ideas don't necessarily get implemented in society or kind of go beyond the scope of the paper itself. So a question for the panelists, and maybe Annie, you can point out people. Has this been your experience, and what are your thoughts on this topic in general?
I'm going to start with you, Emma, because I think in the space of publishing, you've got a lot of experience here. And then Mina, I invite you to, and anyone else who wants to join in, please do. But Emma.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading this question more carefully. It's honestly a frustration for us in academia too. You know, a question I would love more engineering students to think about is, why does it take so long to translate discoveries into practice? And to me, this is a question I ask myself and try to do something about, working in the area of technologies to help address climate change, which is really an urgent issue, of course, for all of us. Increasingly, academic research involves industry partnerships, and I think that's an important part in learning where are the technical gaps that matter in the near term versus questions that are still really important for the longer term. And I think those partnerships with industry also help on the training piece. So for graduate students to learn more about how they can independently also take some of what they're doing at the lab bench and learn how to scale it up and to put it into practice. So we're trying to close that gap, but absolutely, Martin, it's a question we ask ourselves all the time, and it is frustrating for us too sometimes.
I'm sorry, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I'll tag on that. So I've been personally frustrated with disconnect too. So I started researching how students learn design. And then there were questions now that couldn't be answered without me actually talking to people in the industry. And research, by involving industry professionals in the research, it opened up so many conversations that gave me the insight to make the work relevant for them, right? So I don't think relevance comes without conversations with real people. So any ways to tailor your research process for you to connect with these people you want to actually contribute to, I think is important. So I've been able to do research with professionals, but also do feedback sessions on my findings with people way beyond Ontario. So they're giving me their new leads on how I can package the findings to be made useful for particular audiences. So I don't think anyone would tell me to do it, but your desire for that relevance and connection, I think there's opportunity for that.
Annie, can I add something just shortly?
Yes.
I think it's, oftentimes it comes down to a question of financing also. So there can be a great idea and there can be a need, and that's in fact an implemented technology that's been shown as feasible, and also a corresponding need on the industry side. And then there's a financial gap in getting that, putting the pieces together. And so my point in raising that is I think there's also a role as citizens to voice to, those who control some of the finances, that this is important, that we want money in this way to be spent and to be serving. We would like to accelerate the translation of new discoveries into practices that lead to social good. And so there's a role for industry, a role for academia, and a role for citizens, and just reinforcing that desire.
Thank you, Emma. It's great.
Can I add something to that, just to complement that?
Yes, please do.
It's because both of the things that they commented are absolutely right, and I just want to add that the fact that academia and most of the universities are trying to push that traditional model of just publishing and contributing to human knowledge or that stereotype that we know. They are trying all the effort to make more translational research. Like I just talked about, like how individuals are running the extra mile to try to contact and find audiences that this technology might be suitable. But I think it's really important to not forget the fact that basic research is the foundation for everything, even though it's not, we may not see it like the products or an output in 20, 30 or 50 years, or even we might never see it. Basic research is the first step in order to get a translational research. So I've seen a trend that more research is being translated, but we have not to forget the value of basic research, which is what academia focuses on. So yeah, that's all.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from those of you who've been listening in here? Does anyone want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
I see Cindy's hand is raised.
Can I jump in?
Sure, please do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate Martin's question. I've spent my life trying to figure it out. And what everybody else said made a lot of sense. I find, and I've been in 2 different disciplines, so in engineering and in education as well, and I find sometimes the political moment is ripe for a particular idea, in which case it's easier to get the funding and support and the capacity to make that happen. So I know Professor Greg Evans has had that sort of unexpected positive attention for some of his atmospheric research, because it hit a policy moment. And so all of a sudden he got attention, there's been a certain kind of support, and yet many other things that he does might not, or that other people do might not. So I think my experience is that nobody ever studies something or spends this much time of their life hoping it won't get implemented. So usually, but there's a difference between, like, theory and practice is never one-to-one. Practice is always more specific and contextualized. Theory is not necessarily fully abstracted, but never fits the particular practice perfectly. So part of it is a conversation about what do we mean by that translation. And I think if we could all have that conversation, then we would be more patient with ourselves on both ends. And part of it is also like capacity building. So our dean, current and past, has put together these funds, that 2 different kinds of funds that allow us to on purpose be useful. So one example of this is instructional innovation. So you can do research on something that has been identified by the faculty as something they would like to practice better. And that's partly how our ethics and equity case studies came to be. So it began as a thing that the dean wanted implemented. We then did research, we made it happen, and now it's had uptake. So I think there are sometimes, so when somebody names something as a priority, it's often easier to get that uptake. And sometimes it begins with the research, and then you say, this ought to be a priority, and here's why. So, but it's usually, it takes longer than immediate practice, where you say, what should I do now? And that's usually more practical in the moment.
Sorry, I'm muted because of the hammers. I think in our last moment, what might be nice to do is just do give each of you one final opportunity to speak briefly. If you think about the students on this call, I think we're losing a couple because we're getting close to 1 o'clock. Is there a message of hope or support as they sort of discover their own career journey and their interest in research? Is there just a message of hope or one last thing you'd like to leave students with? Maybe Dimpho, we could start with you.
Sure. So I really think follow your passion is the one message that I'll give, whether that leads you to academia or to academia back to industry. I think just following and knowing what you're passionate about and following any opportunities that arise through that is what I'll leave with you.
Great, thank you. Emma.
To remember that there isn't one mold of a researcher, that we're all different, and that's part of the strength, I think, as a community. And so to take time on your own to reflect quietly and think about what it is that motivates you. The community will be welcoming. We're all very different. And so it's really taking that time to decide what it is that motivates you most.
Thank you. Herman.
I would say, don't be afraid to ask for help, because there will be always like good people that will make anything for you to be great, I guess. So don't be afraid to ask questions, even if you think that they may be dumb, they aren't. So there will be always someone that will help you for sure.
Amazing, thank you. And Minha, final word.
Oh, pressure. Thank you. I always worked during and between studies, and all the experiences, everything fed into it. So you as a whole package, you matter. So your values, your personal history, your relationships, things that are brought to your attention, they all matter. So keep, like Dimpho said, keep pursuing it. There will be people on the same bus with you. You'll find them.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. For the students here, I did want to encourage you to check out the ILead website and join our newsletter. We have a really interesting program coming up on November 8th on virtual teams and how to be effective on virtual teams. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. So with that, thank you so much. And maybe we can do like a little virtual round of applause for our incredible panelists. I hope you got something out of this conversation, and we look forward to seeing you at future conversations. So all the best, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.